Yeah, Bernard Casey from the University of Warwick. I want to ask what the panel members understand by this word advice, because today I've heard advice, I've heard guidance, I've heard information, I've heard conversation, and this reminds me of what I call Humpty Dumpty politics, where the word means anything that you want it to mean.
And to whom would you like to address that?
Everybody.
Everybody, oh goodness gracious me, that's too difficult. Who'd like to start? Yep, our advisor.
I'll happily make a start on that. From our perspective, advice is where a clearly documented and defined either recommendation or set of recommendations are made to a client, and that advice comes under FCA regulation and the protections that come with that. That is the only, from our point of view as a regulated firm, that's our only definition of advice.
Ben, you want to have a go?
I wouldn't really add anything to that. I mean, obviously, the distinction between advice and guidance is going to be difficult for the public to kind of understand, but there is obviously that regulatory boundary between advice and guidance, which obviously shouldn't provide that product recommendation. And there's obviously a key challenge there for industry, and for regulator and policymakers to communicate those differences to individuals that are going through the guidance process.
Okay, thanks Ben. John, you would like to add a voice?
Well, not really. I mean,
Okay.
I think there is a clear difference. Certainly lawyers recognise the difference between advice and guidance. But I think, as has just been said, whether the consumer will recognise the difference between the two is an entirely different thing, and I suspect they won't. From my personal perspective, I think it's going to be really important for people to get proper advice. And I think if the new guidance service can point people in that direction, that will be a plus. But I think the great danger with all of these reforms is that not just these, but any reforms, is this fog of confusion, fog of law. Actually, sometimes they can be the same. And I think it's going to be really important to try and cut through that as far as we possibly can.
Okay, and Ross, from your perspective, where you want to go along the... I'll go along the row if everyone's keen to answer this question.
I think, Bernard, that is an absolutely crucial question, and it's something that we have completely messed up in the UK, unfortunately. Most people do not understand what the word advice means anymore because it's not clear what it really means. And you've got services like the Pensions Advisory Service, you've got the Money Advice Service, which don't give advice. It's called advice, but it's not in the regulated sense. So we had an opportunity with RDR, in my view, to differentiate between what really is what we would call expert, individual, paid for help, advice, information. Whether we can find another word, I don't know. The vernacular is difficult. But guidance itself, this pension-wise service, does need to help the public understand what guidance is, or non-advice. I mean, we've even got this word non-advice. You know, it is not something that the public is equipped for. My distinction would be that guidance or non-advice is like saying you want to get from A to B, and somebody gives you a bus timetable or a train timetable or an app or a sat-nav or something like that, and tells you to find your own way. Whereas advice would be the kind of chauffeur-driven limousine that picks you up from your house and makes sure that you get to the other side with proper individual hand-holding and taking you where you want to go and taking responsibility for that journey working for you. Until we do actually get perhaps some way forward in terms of differentiating what the word advice really means, it will be difficult to restore trust, because again, part of the reason that people don't have trust is that the people they thought were giving them advice before were actually, in many cases, salesmen, commission-driven salesmen. That wasn't really advice, but it was called advice. And it's not surprising people then find that the word advice is sullied for them.
And Maggie, is this the official FCA definition?
I could try to give you an official regulatory definition. It would involve UK legislation, EU legislation, and a great deal of time. I think the word advice in the world in which I work means one thing. I think the word advice in the world of the consumer probably means something like it means in the Oxford English Dictionary, which is not an unreasonable position to take. My strong suggestion when we've been talking about the content of the guidance service for pensions wise is that instead of talking to consumers in terms of the label, this is advice, this is not regulated advice, this is guidance, the label doesn't mean anything, would be to talk to people in terms of what it will do and what it means. It will tell you what your options might be, it will tell you what the consequences of those options will be, it will not tell you what option you should take, that is up to you, that is your decision, and as it is your decision, you do not have redress rights. So rather than getting hung up on a series of labels, which I accept have created a lot of confusion for consumers, I think what you do is talk to the customer or the consumer about what it is, and what it will do and what it means for them, rather than getting into esoteric, non-advised, advised and regulated advice, in my suggestion.
We see advice playing a key role in the future, and it should play a key role in the future. Our members, as trustees and employers of large schemes, however, are very nervous about the word advice. They are very nervous about being seen to give advice, whether that's regulated advice or more generally something that the courts might consider to be advice. So we think it's very important to extend this debate to the trust-based world. Just taking a slightly different tack, we also see it important that the advice market adjusts itself to the new world of freedom and choice, and at the moment we see the market struggling to do so. We think two things are really important going forward. One, that the frictional costs of moving from an accumulation vehicle to a retirement income vehicle need to be reduced for the mass market, but also that advice takes account of all of the solutions in the market. Typically it's a retail solution, and what we'll see emerging in the near future are a number of institutional solutions to retirement income, and advice has to adjust to take account of that wider range of choices that will be available to people.
Hello everybody. Age UK is an advice agency in common parlance, but we don't give regulated advice. I often think that actually you could define advice in some respects as liability. And there are different regulations according to what sort of advice you're giving. And one thing I think we need to be careful of is just assuming that the advice will be around pensions. It will often be around state pensions, it will be around care as well, increasingly. So I think we have to think that the service will be broad enough, or at least link into other options as well. I think there will be a certain amount of explaining to consumers where the limits are, but also pushback from consumers saying to themselves at least, but what shall I do? I think one of the challenges is, to refer to what Dean was saying, is that actually this isn't going to be a once and for all decision. People will need to come back to decision making, and that's a big change. So I think there is a big challenge for the whole world of money, financial information and advice generally to be fit for purpose in this new world.